that were passed by various colonial legislatures denouncing the Stamp Act. The most famous of those resolutions was in Virginia, and those resolutions were proposed by the fiery eventual patriot Patrick Henry. So how did Americans protest the Stamp Act? Well, in various colonial legislatures, they passed resolutions denouncing them. The other thing that they did is they called for a Stamp Act Congress. Delegates from all over colonial America would meet in a Stamp Act Congress, and they would collectively denounce the Stamp Acts. Now, the Stamp Act Congress had no kind of power, but it does have significance. Why? Why is it significant that, yes, go ahead, Josie.
Because all the colonists are coming together.
Yes, colonial Americans are coming together, not for their mutual benefit against the French and Indian, but to protest taxation. And then lastly, they formed, a colonial sort of associations that would promote boycotts of British imports. In order to enforce these boycotts, vigilante organizations formed called the Sons of Liberty. And the Sons of Liberty implemented boycotts, non-importation agreements. In other words, until Britain recognizes our argument, we won't buy things from England. Now, those boycotts were fairly effective. If you remember this, during the Revolutionary era, in response to the Stamp Act, the Sons of Liberty and the boycotts are going to be implemented. And now we're going to talk about the Townsend Duties, same thing. It's interesting when America becomes independent and we don't like what Britain's doing in terms of impressment and other things in 1807, and we don't like Britain's action, Jefferson asks Congress for an Embargo Act. Now, Jefferson is kind of a child of the Revolution. And so that Embargo Act that's later in history, 1807, in order to get Britain to comply with sort of our neutrality, it's interesting that we were fighting for Britain to recognize our neutrality in 1807, and we were fighting to get Germany to recognize our neutrality in 1917, right? Jefferson proposes an embargo, a boycott, right? Anyways, the collective protests of the colonists might have had some impact because no stamps were ever collected, and the Stamp Act was repealed, and it was replaced with the Declaratory Act, which is 1766. And the Declaratory Act was basically the repeal of the Stamp Act, but a kind of proclamation that it wasn't being repealed because we agree with your argument. It was being repealed because we want to, right? Not because we think you're right. Now we know this, and I'll go quickly now, Kelly, because I was going too slowly before. I'll go quickly now for you, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. The Declaratory Act gave way to the Townsend Duties. Repealing the Stamp Act did not solve Britain's financial problems. And so the Townsend Duties were an attempt to also generate revenue for England. And the Townsend Duties were proposed by Charles Townsend, right? And they were taxes on products that were imported from England to America. Things like nails, lead, and tea. Now, the Townsend Duties were purposeful to generate revenue, and the colonists are going to protest those as well. Now, their protests take a little bit more time to get sort of started and develop, but they still represent taxation without representation. And significantly, John Dickinson, and who was John Dickinson? Does anyone remember besides Fleck and myself? Kendrick, do you remember who John Dickinson was?
He was a rich lawyer from Philadelphia. He was in the Continental Congress and Constitutional Convention.
Yes, you know a lot, Kendrick. That John Dickinson was a wealthy and conservative lawyer in colonial America who concedes that Britain cannot tax the colonists without their consent. And he does so in a series of letters from a Pennsylvania farmer that denounces the Townsend Duties. The Townsend Duties, besides sort of attempting to generate revenue, created layers of bureaucracy, customs officials that were responsible to collect these taxes. These customs officials came into conflict particularly with merchants and their agents in America, and significantly in New England, particularly Boston. Conflicts between the customs officials and their agents became so contentious in Boston that the customs officials in 1768 asked for troops to be sent from England to Boston in order to protect them. And remember, in September of 1768, the British sent 4,000 troops to a town of 16,000. And those troops camped on the Boston Common, right in the middle of the town. If you recall, we said it was a miracle, Punel, that for 18 months there was very little problems between those troops and the Bostonians. But eventually, tensions, probably dealing with alcohol and employment, exploded in what became the Boston Massacre. And this is in March of 1770. And in the Boston Massacre, blood was shed. Five people were killed. Oh, was there a powerfully built mulatto that was killed in that Boston Massacre? Let me see, was his name Crispus Attucks, possibly? Wouldn't it be wonderful if that was asked on the AP test? We'd have 100%. They'd probably come and check. How can it possibly be that 68 of 68 students all got this right? Oh, because we have Crispus Attucks Day here at Gateway, right? Crispus Attucks Day, a powerfully built mulatto, right? So, yes, the Boston Massacre. And we said what is interesting about the Boston Massacre is certainly that blood is shed, but what's also interesting, in the aftermath of it, Townsend is relieved of sort of the head of the ministry and replaced with Lord North, who repeals all of the Townsend Duties but the tax on tea. And there is a period of relative quiet in colonial America between 1770 and 1773. Now, I should tell you this. Dear Shalani. I should tell you that undoubtedly lots of other things happened in this time period. So let's say you were reading your book like I was reading a period ago, and reading about the Tea Act and all of this stuff. There's lots of things that I am not saying, right? Which is okay, because we can only say so much, right, dear Courtney? So when you review this in other venues, you may add things to that. You might even remember things that you want to add to whatever, however you're taking notes, that you want to connect other people that maybe I didn't mention that might be significant, that you might want to add in. But we do know this, that in 1773 things changed because of the Tea Act. Now the Tea Act was intended to bail out what gigantic, enormously important British corporation? Go ahead, Kendra.
The British East India Company.
The British East India Company. And the British East India Company was teetering on bankruptcy. And what the Tea Act did is give the British East India Company a virtual monopoly on tea sales in North America. Cut out all the middlemen and would allow the British East India Company to sell directly to retailers in America through agents throughout America. This was win, 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 win. Remember we said the British thought, wow, this is great. The British East India Company will be saved. That's great. The colonists will get cheaper tea. They'll like that. And we will collect the final Townsend duty, the tax on tea, and generate revenue from the crown. Win, win, win. Everybody wins. All right? The colonists do not think, look at it that way. They see this as consistent with violating their rights as well. Their significant protest in December of '73 is the Boston Tea Party. Now, how does Britain react to the Boston Tea Party? Boston Tea Party, like the Stamp Act, is a game changer, is it not, dear Kunnell?
Yeah, it closes down for Boston.
So Britain passes a series of laws, Kate Leonard, that are collectively known as what?
Power of it all.
the coercive acts or the intolerable acts, and one aspect of that is to shut down the Port of Boston